Welcome to Wednesday, the 19th day of February, 2025. Well, a lot of you still waking up to extremely cold temperatures and wind chills, and some of you had to shovel. It all depends on where you are. First of all, we're going to see that cold air stay a little bit longer, so frosty windows, like you see right there, will continue in many areas along and east of the mountains where the Arctic air is backed up against the higher terrain. We also have another little wave coming off the Pacific that'll bring moisture into the Pacific Northwest, the Northern Great Basin, the Northern Rockies later today into the day on Thursday. There'll be another bit of snow, especially in the mountains, but along and west of the Divide, along Interstate 80, there's going to be Pacific moisture producing snow shower activity. So it's still going to be very, very cold today. Very cold to start tomorrow, and then this little wave comes on through. The Arctic air is still on tap to retreat. It will. It'll get shoved off to the east here. For a lot of you, you're really not going to notice it till Friday. Some of you, you'll notice it on Thursday. But as we get into the Friday and the weekend, we'll have a nice big rebound in temperature. Now, snow cover may keep back the warm up a bit in the river valleys and the basins, but everybody will be able to see some rebounding temperatures. Now, we're going to rebound, and I think there's a fairly quiet stretch of weather from this weekend for most of next week. There's a couple of exceptions. We'll talk about that. And we're still expecting March to kick into gear with a stormy pattern starting up again after the break in the weather. Now, for those of you in southeastern Wyoming, this is a graphic I showed you yesterday to where we had this little finger of where the Arctic air was going to get backed up against the higher terrain. Then Pacific moisture was going to overrun it, and there could be a boundary of heavier snow. Well, I have to really give a hat tip to the European model. The other models were kind of hinting at this, but boy, it absolutely nailed it. And while it may not have got the geographic placement of the snow exactly, because as folks in the Cheyenne area, the capital city of Wyoming, know that instead of 4.9 inches, it was more like 7.1 officially as of early this morning. So the band ended up more like this, a little bit further south. But this is a really good representation of when the models actually get it right. And the situation of the terrain interacting with the Arctic air, the Pacific moisture, instability. The reason why the snow came down so heavy at times was the atmosphere got quite unstable, kind of like an afternoon shower, thunderstorm that you get in the spring and summer. It focused its energy right along that boundary, so it was a narrow strip, but a very heavy strip of snow in some areas. That was southeastern Wyoming, at least for southeastern Wyoming near the Cheyenne area, the biggest 24-hour snow event of the season so far. So occasionally the models will get it right. Most of the time they under forecast, but this time got it pretty close. So when you take a look at this movie from Jan Curtis, you can see the snow squall coming on in, at least the first of the heavier snow bands started to move in by mid to late afternoon, and then really held up right along the higher terrain of the Cheyenne Ridge, especially over Cheyenne, then up on the ridge, and then you can see the heavier snow as it came on in. And it came in narrow bands, and you'll see that along these Arctic boundaries. Notice how big those snowflakes are. Keep in mind, when this heavy snow fell, temperatures were well below zero. They were about -4, -5. So you don't tend to have big snowflakes like that when it's that cold, but that moist Pacific air interacting with the Arctic air, that's when you put those two air masses together, is when things really can get wild. There was a break, sun came out, you're thinking, oh, it's over, right? Well, that's when the next band came in shortly thereafter. A lot of areas frosted by a lot of snow squalls. Now, this is a good indication of the instability. This was north of Saratoga yesterday afternoon, and as this instability moved west to east, these snow showers and snow squalls interacted with that Arctic boundary as it headed east. So when you get Arctic air and you get Pacific air, you put them together, you get a lot of action, as these two guys found out really quickly in the heavy snow that hit the north side of Cheyenne first earlier in the day, and the widespread frost all across the High Plains region, making for some beautiful scenes all the way into Colorado Springs, Colorado. And even northern New Mexico earlier in the week getting into that with finally some moisture there. The National Weather Service advisories and watches for cold is pretty extensive. Basically, we have cold advisories from the farthest southern tip of Texas to the Canadian border, even into North Florida and southeast Georgia. Look at the cold weather advisories into Arkansas. Winter storm warnings for Kentucky, down here into the Appalachians. So just a lot of wild winter weather coast to coast. The satellite image today will take a little bit of a different perspective, taking it a little bit more east. Here's the next Pacific wave coming in. That's going to be the weather maker tonight and tomorrow. Can't really see the Arctic air up here, but you can see it with the low cloud deck pushing all the way down to the Gulf Coast, the second Gulf Coast Arctic intrusion of the year. Like we have been showing you over the last couple of days, the different way we can take a look at the satellite imagery by detecting temperature. Boy, look at that. Wow, that's impressive. That's just the Arctic air. Again, over eastern Montana, the Dakotas, northeastern Wyoming, Gillette this morning hit minus 28. And you can see that the really deep Arctic air still is poised up there, but starting to edge further south. This just shows you where the air is the coldest. Very impressive. And then you can look at where the temperatures are going to be sub-zero just before 6 a.m. this morning. Very impressive. Sub-zero temperatures from the Arctic Circle all the way down into maybe as far south as northern Oklahoma there. There you can see the temperatures this morning. We've got minus 40 there, minus 42 there. Gillette did drop to minus 28, minus 22 in Sheridan. Look at this, minus 30 along the South Dakota. I believe that's Martin, South Dakota. And minus 26 in Chadron. So it's the real deal. Now, I should have showed you this graphic earlier this winter, but La Nina, when you're in La Nina, you tend to have two phases. And we saw a lot of this phase in October, November, and December, where it's predominantly Pacific dominated, west to east flow. You get downslope east of the mountains. So east of the mountains, you get very little moisture. The mountains do catch the Pacific moisture and temperatures stay above normal. You have a warm fall. You have a warm start of winter. We'll call that La Nina phase 1. La Nina phase 2 is when the jet stream buckles. And this is exactly what's happening now. This is exactly what happened in January. So a lot of the winter so far is textbook La Nina phase. But if you break up La Nina's different kind of characters, this is one character which dominated through basically December. This pattern dominated after the new year with the cold Arctic outbreaks we've had. And then you kind of go back and forth. You'll go between these phases before La Nina goes away. And you're seeing that right now with the Arctic air mass centered over southern Minnesota, going back up into the northwestern areas of this low. But you can see this next Pacific wave pushing into the coast later today. There's your Arctic outbreak showing up very well in your temperature anomalies as of noon today. By Friday, though, the Arctic air really gets a kick east. It's all the way up into northeast Canada. Pacific air now dominates. This will bring Pacific moisture, though, to the mountains, probably all the way through early Friday. Then over the weekend, here's the warmth. Look at this push from the Pacific, pushing temperatures warmer than average, even into the area that's the coldest. And you'll see this a lot. The area that's the coldest now gets the biggest warm up. So this is textbook Chinook conditions along the east slopes of the Canadian Rockies. So help is on the way, folks, for those of you, especially in that oval there. As that warmer air comes in, the colder air gets regulated to the far eastern areas of the United States, but it's much less intense by the weekend than it is now. This is the next batch of moisture coming into the west between now and the end of the week. So it's not terribly heavy, but there'll be more snow for the Wasatch, a little bit of snow for southwestern Wyoming, the mountains of Colorado, then back up into the Bitterroot and the Cascades again. This system will move through later today, tomorrow, into early Friday. And this is what the precipitation looks like through Sunday, coast to coast. And you can see the snow and how far south it's going to be getting. Look at this. Now, It's February. It's cold, but snow in Arkansas, northern Alabama, northern sections of Georgia, Mississippi, that's far south, even for February, for a snow event. Here's your westerly flow, really kicking in next week. So here's our break. However, we have a wave, a ripple right here that we've got to watch. This will come into the Pacific Northwest coast Tuesday. So Tuesday night into Wednesday, this little wave could cut across here. So we'll need to watch this, possibly producing some weather in the northern Rockies and northern plains around Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. This guy up here is going to end up digging south, breaking off from the main jet stream flow, as you see here, by next Friday. By next Friday, we're going to have stormy weather in the Great Lakes and along the East Coast. This guy gets cut off and may be a rain producer for California by late next week. This low pressure system is what's going to initiate the stormy weather that will get started the first week of March. So the Arctic outbreak is going to ease. Got to get through today and part of tomorrow. We have a break. Then we go back into the action again once we get past the 1st of March. We also talked about a stratospheric warming event taking place at the end of February into early March, which could complicate things and really add fuel to the fire for March. And there it is, right there, still showing up in the long-range trends. So there's a lot on the table, short-term and long-term. Have yourself a good Wednesday. Stay warm.